Josh Farley is an ecological economist. What is that? And how is it different from a neoclassical economist? Josh, talk to us about the difference between what you teach now and what you learned when you were a student.
So to begin with, since the most widely known field is neoclassical economics, neoclassical economists, the dominant goal, not just among the economists, but among politicians and decision makers worldwide, is to have endless economic growth. And it's of a specific type of economic growth. We want exponential growth. We want to double the amount we consume, essentially, every generation or less. And to believe this, that we can continually doubling the amount we consume, if you believe that the economic system is physical, that we're actually, consuming real physical things and producing real physical things, then we're talking about an exponential growth in raw material use and energy use and on a finite planet. So Kenneth Boulding is a famous economist who recognized the problems with this, and he said there's only two types of people who believe in exponential growth, and that's madmen and economists. And so there's this goal that the economy will expand forever, and the way they can justify this is they believe that human ingenuity and technology is such that we'll always develop new resources. As that one resource becomes scarce, the price goes up, we develop a substitute, and we keep on charging. Nature is unnecessary, raw materials are unnecessary, we'll solve the problem. Ecological economists, in contrast, basically start from the laws of physics. So they argue that we live on a finite planet. It's a law of physics that you can't make something from nothing. So everything the economy produces requires the transformation of raw materials from nature into economic products. You can't do work without energy. We need energy to cause that transformation. Most of the energy we use is fossil fuels. And you can't make nothing from something. So the energy, when we burn it, we don't destroy or create matter energy, we don't destroy it, but we take useful energy and turn it into waste, greenhouse gases, and particulate matter. And when we take the raw materials from nature, we take the useful building blocks of ecosystems, transform them into economic products that inevitably break down, wear out, fall apart, and are returned to nature as waste. And humans, like all species, depend on healthy ecosystems for our survival. When we remove the structural building blocks of ecosystems, the raw materials, and we spew back waste, we degrade those ecosystems. They lose the capacity to regulate our climate, to protect us from UV radiation, to purify our air and water, to create the soils we need for agricultural production. So we lose those absolutely vital elements of ecosystem structure. And the other big difference, I would say, is what are the goals of economic activity? So, before you can decide what you should do in an economy, you have to decide what you want. And conventional economists have defined the goal is essentially the maximization of monetary value in the short run and ever increasing output to maximize monetary value in the long run. And the maximization of monetary value means allocating resources to those who are willing and able to pay the most, which essentially means we take our scarce resources and we allocate them towards the wealthiest people. So
healthcare, for example.
So healthcare, and actually, so if you want to look at the question of healthcare, economists' goal is to maximize GDP, and U.S. spends about 17% of its GDP on healthcare, and that means we have the best system on the planet. Nobody touches us. If we spend as much on healthcare as the average European country does, the difference would pay off our entire national deficit. Healthcare is actually a great.
Are we that much healthier?
No, and the fact is actually on every single measure, virtually every measure of health that we care about, infant mortality, maternal mortality, life expectancy, venereal disease, the US is behind essentially all the European countries.
Is neoclassical economics really so much like a science? Are people really that rational?
So when I went into it, I really thought economics was how we could use the resources we have available to fulfill human needs and desires, and which is a whole array of things. It's not just what we consume, it's our social relationships, it's the ability to enjoy healthy environments and nature, and it's the enrichment of ourselves culturally and through the advances of science and literature and arts and interactions with each other. So I had this very broad goal, and ecological economics in general pays a lot of attention to that idea. What is the desirable lens? So going back to that healthcare idea, the desirable lens for an ecological economist would be to maximize years of healthy life. And how you assess two systems that both have the same output is you would divide by the cost. So you would say, you know, how efficiently we achieve years of healthy life. You would take the output and divide it by GDP. You would divide it by what we spend, which says, from our perspective, gross national product, what everybody tries to maximize, is what we should be trying to, not to minimize, but to have as small as possible to achieve the desirable life we want.
So it must have been a shock for you.
It was, yes, it was very much a shock. And the other huge shock, of course, was I had a background in science. I was trained as a biologist, which meant, first of all, that you empirically test your assumptions. And in economics, there's a whole bunch of assumptions required for their models to work. And most of those assumptions have been empirically tested and found to be false. So the difference between science and ideology is scientists empirically test their assumptions, and if the empirical tests reject the assumptions, they come up with a new theory. If you're an ideologue, you either reject the tests or you stick to your theory no matter how often it's been rejected. So that part of the scientific method, I don't think a conventional economist applied. And the other idea that we can essentially, we don't need raw natural resources. There's a famous economist who said there's no reason we can't have a perfectly functioning economy with no natural resources whatsoever. That was back in the 70s. I think that economist has repented. But the Nobel laureate from 2005 said climate change really doesn't matter that much because it only affects food and agriculture. They account for less than 3% of our GNP. If we lose 30% of agriculture, there's no harm done. And he actually goes on to say that we'd achieve our GNP goals in 2051 we otherwise would achieve in 2050. We would have mass starvation. But if you're measuring everything in dollars, a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. It doesn't matter if it's a dollar of food or a dollar of movies.
So is our teaching of economics changing?
I actually, I was trained as a neoclassical economist, and the only reason I stuck through the training was that so I would know the arguments and be able to debate them on a level footing with the conventional economists. But I find they are still largely unwilling to listen to alternative views. And in some cases, I actually see kind of retrenchment around those goals of the neoclassical economy. But I'm outside of economics, outside of the field of economics, I think academia and politics and everybody else is opening up to alternative views. And most heartening, I see, our society starting to question those goals of economics. And there's a famous ecologist, Aldo Leopold, who said being an ecologist is like living alone in a world of wounds because you're aware of all the degradation that other people aren't aware of. Being an ecological economist, we're aware of the ecological degradation and also the fact that we're pursuing the wrong goals economically, the inequality, the fact that we're not developing richer, more meaningful lives. So I always thought being an ecological economist was like living alone in a world of wounds. But Occupy Wall Street makes me feel not alone anymore.